Hello everyone, welcome back to today's video. So in this video, we are going to talk about one of the most commonly used widgets in Flutter, TextFormField. And I'm going to talk about some of the critical mistakes developers often make when working with forms in Flutter. I will not only highlight these mistakes, but I'm also going to show you guys how to fix them with clear examples. So if you're building a form in Flutter, make sure you watch to the end of this video to avoid these issues in your project. So let's get started. So right here, as you can see, I just have a Flutter app and I've created a screen, a login screen. So I have this button to just go to and fro to the screen. I have this test form feed, as you can see on the right side of my screen. We have the full name, the email, the phone number, and the password, right? You can see just dummy test form feed and all that. And finally, I have a submit button that we can use to submit. So let me increase my font size because I think it's going to be small for some people. So here, the first thing I'm going to talk about, the first mistake I want to talk about is not disposing of TextEditingController in stateful widgets. So when using TextEditingController, failing to call the dispose method can cause memory leaks. Since controllers hold references to UI elements, they remain in memory even after the widget is destroyed or disposed, okay? So as long as you're using a stateful widget, you need to call dispose. For stateless widgets, there's no point calling dispose because stateless widget doesn't hold any state. So there's nothing to dispose, okay? So what we can do here is always dispose of the controller in the dispose method when working with stateful widgets. So right here, I'm going to call dispose, right? So inside here, what I'm going to do is just to call the email controller.dispose, password controller.dispose, full name, and also the all the controllers that we are using in our UI, you need to dispose them off, okay? In order to avoid memory leaks and all that, okay? Then the second mistakes developer makes is not validating user input properly. As you can see here, most times, some users don't even validate this method, right? They just click on submit and send empty data to the database. Sometimes they send null, right? So it's not really something good to do. So users can enter incorrect or empty data if validation isn't implemented properly. And it can lead to unexpected crashes or logic errors and all that. So we need to use the validator property inside TextFormField, right, to check for valid inputs. So right here, we have our TextFormField. What we are going to do here is to add validator. So this is one of the reasons why I prefer TextFormField to TextField, right? With TextField, it doesn't have a validator property. That means we cannot do proper validation with TextField. We can only use the controller.test is empty whenever user taps on the submit, which is not really ideal like that. So what we can do here, first thing is to check if value is equal to null or value.trim, right? Using trim, you try to remove any spacing, right? So if it's empty, what we are going to do is just to show return full name is empty. Then if it's not empty, we can just return null. This is the same thing we can also do for other test form field, right? Let's say we don't want, like for email, we can also check if email is empty and then call the validator properly. And I'm going to do that inside here. So instead of email, I'm going to say, instead of full name, I'm going to say email is required. And we can also add other validations inside here as well, right? If value does not contain art, we can say invalid email format and other things. You can use regex as well, define your patterns to validate email. Then for phone number, we can also check if number, if it's empty and all that, we can say number is required. We can also do the same thing for password. And so if password is empty, we can say password is required. We can also check if password length is less than 8. So we can say password must be at least 8 characters. And you can also perform other functions too if password does not contain special characters and all that. That's one advantage of using this validator. Okay, and another thing again, we need to another issues that people don't developers make is not wrapping the test form field inside a form widget, right? So just having this validator inside this test form field doesn't make it valid, right? If you don't use a form widget, it makes it impossible to validate this widget regardless of the validation that you added inside here. So in order to get that working, we are going to use the form widget with a global key, right, to validate fields collectively. So what I'm going to do here, first thing, I'm going to look for the parent widget that is housing all these test form field. And in this case is our column, right? So I'm going to wrap this column with a form widget, right? Okay, so this makes it form now. So I think this is right form now. So what I'm going to do next is to create a global key that I'm going to use to validate it properly. So right here, I have my form key. It's going to be form state, the data type. All right, then I'm going to pass it inside this form widget that I created, right? I'm going to say form, like key, sorry, and I'll pass the form key. So in order to validate this input fields properly, I'm going to go to the button that submits to database or anywhere to save the values. So what I'm going to do is to check, I'm going to grab this one. So let me say if, I think this is a lot. Okay, I'm going to do something like this. All right. This just gave me autocorrect. So if it's validated, it's going to show, I think I don't need this guy. So instead, what I want to do, instead of reset, I don't want to reset. I don't know what reset does though. So let's leave this one. So we can just do something like this. If scaffold, blah, 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 right? You can just call the scaffold. I think this should be scaffold manager, right? Yeah, scaffold messenger of context. Yeah. So what happens here is that these values, if I click on this button now, this form key.currentState.validate is going to check the form fields if they are properly validated. If they are validated, then this method is going to run. And it's at this point that we are going to send the values to our database and save it whichever way we want. Okay. So if I click submit, you can see these errors showing. So these are all the validator, the conditions that we added inside this validator callback, right? You can see full name and all these things are required. So let me start validating them one after the other. First thing, okay, we are having an error here. So I'm going to wrap this guy with single child screw view to just get rid of that error. All right, let me go back and return back to the screen. So right here inside this full name, I'm going to pass a name, right? And I'm going to pass, if I click on submit, now you can see the full name is not showing that error anymore. So let me do for email. It's still showing invalid email format. The reason is because it doesn't contain this character at, the special character. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add the at, and if I click submit, it's gone. Phone number as well, I can add phone number, right? And the password, we can add, say I add something less than 6, it shows an error. If I complete it, right, it doesn't show an error. It shows form submitted successfully, right? So that's how we properly use validator to validate form very well, like to validate fields collectively. That way, it makes our app much more UX friendly, right? And users will love it though. Yeah, the error just simplifies everything and reduces a lot of, boilerplate codes or codes that are not necessary in terms of validation. All right. The next mistake that developers makes is not using obscure text for password fields. I've seen that a lot in a lot of apps, and it's something that cause security issues. So leaving password visible can compromise security. imagine if you're in a public place and there is no way to toggle between this, like to make this keyboard visible and not visible. And you're just entering your keyboard and your email, your details in public. Someone might just see those details, right? Capture them, and then your security has been compromised. So what we do is to use obscure text, set it to true, and then we provide toggle button for better UX. So how to handle this is this. I'm going to come to, because it's very important we do it inside our password. I'm going to come here and say obscure text to true, right? Setting this now, it automatically hides the keyboard, the password. But most users, once it's hidden, they might just enter wrong numbers, right? Most users will want to see what they have already entered. Maybe if they are not in a public place and all that, just your eyes only. We need to add that toggle button for better UX. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to go up here. I'll create a local or global variable, and I'm going to call this. It's going to be is obscured, something like. So initially, I'm going to set it to true because I want the value to be hidden once users enters that screen. So I'm going to set the value here instead of using a constant true false value. Okay. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to work with the surface icon. So let me save this. We have our surface icon, and inside here I'm going to use icon button. Right. We have the unpressed for icon button. And this icon, what I'm going to do now is to set an icon. Then I would say if obscured, right, return icons.visibility, right, else return icons.visibility off. Yeah. So something like this. Then on the unpress of it, you can see now the button is showing, but right now it's not reacting to taps. So what I can do is to use a set state here because we are not using any state management, right? That's why I'm using set state. So we can say obscure equal to not obscured, right? I think this is showing as fine now. So we need to remove this fine now because it's something that we need to update. All right, let me return to the screen and save it. So right now, if I click, you can see that it's showing visible and not visible, just like that. So this helps for, not to compromise user security in public places and also to provide a better UX. So it's one mistake you need to avoid when working with TextFormField. Always try to, always obscure text for password fields, okay? When working with TextForm fields. So another mistakes developer make is not setting the correct keyboard type. So using the default keyboard for fields like email or numbers makes input frustrating. So in order for us to fix this, we need to use the appropriate keyboard for each input type. And to do that, there's a property called keyboard type that we can use for this. So for TextFormField, by default, the keyboard type is let me look for that. So let me try to say keyboard type. I think the default keyboard type is a test, I believe. Yeah. We use test input dot, we have test. Okay. So this is the default one that we can use for full name, and you can see all these stuffs to our test. But let's say for email address, we need to use its own default type, which is email address. Okay. Then for phone number input field, we need, if you notice, if I come to this phone number, it's still showing these numbers and all that. So it's not really ideal. So we need to make sure that we are using default test input fields for all these ones. So if I go back now, after adding this test input keyboard type, if I click here, click on phone number, is giving me the default, right, which is correct. I click on email, you can see now it's automatically showing me this art, not the same with full name, right? But for email, it's showing me the art, right, at the first screen instead of me going to these plates or clicking additional buttons to see it. All right. So let me close this. All right. Then for phone number, you can see it's bringing up a number keyboard. So this is much more ideal, and you can see it's improving and reducing input frustration, right? Input frustration and all that. So this is something you also need to keep note of and try to avoid it in your next Flutter project. So the next thing I want to talk about is not handling unfit submitted for form navigation. So we can use, I'm going to show you guys two things on how we can handle this form navigation. But first, let me handle it in this. Let's say you need to use pressing enter does nothing when moving between feeds. In this case, our own is done. When you click on done, you can see it does nothing. Normally, when you click on done, it should remove focus from this current test form feed and move the focus to the next feed that is available. All right. So the reason why this is not working is because we are not really utilizing unfit submitted, and we are not really utilizing the test input action effectively. And there's also another method that we can handle this using focus node. But I'm going to show you guys a different one that is much more good and simpler using test input action. So what we can do here in this our first test form feed, what I'm going to do is to add test input action, right? I will say test input action dot next, right? And I'll also do the same thing for this one, do the same thing for password, right? And do the same thing for, yeah, this is for password. Password shouldn't be next because there's nothing else to be done here. What we can do for password is just to leave it as done, right? Done means everything has been done. We can now validate and send it to the database and all that, okay? Even though user does not tap on this button, we can also do it with password once the whole feed has been validated. So now let's go back. Let me show you guys something. If we go to our test form feed and I click on full name, you can see if this full name is, this also helps in terms of validation. If this full name now is empty, this next button is just showing like this, right? It's showing next. So if you click on next, it moves focus to the next available test form feed, right? It moves focus to the next one, though it doesn't work for numbers, right? But for password, we can now see that it has done. From the done, we can now submit the values, right? You can also do the same thing using unfit submitted, where we can make use of focus node. So let me just say I only want to work with the email and the password for this focus node. So here I'm going to create focus node. So I have my email focus node and I also have my password focus node. You can do it to all of them. You can do it to email, full name, but I just want to show you an example using the email and password. You will notice that once I'm done with the, okay, let me use, yeah, I think this should work. Okay. So see what happens here now. Whenever user taps on the email feed, because email comes before password, right? So let me go back to my email. Right here, I'm going to create on field submitted. All right. What I want to call now is to just say focus node, focus scope dot of context dot request focus. Then the next focus is now going to go to password focus. I can do the same thing here for, say, full name, right? So once you click on feed submitted, we are going to request focus to the email feed, right? So I'm going to save that and let me go back. So if I click this, once I'm done with full name and I click on feed submitted, okay, nothing is working here. I think I need to do something. Yeah, so I did not specify the actual focus node. So there's a property in test form feed where we need to specify the focus node. So I need to do that for, first, let me create additional focus node for full name, right? So inside here, in our full name, I'm going to put a focus node and pass in the full name focus node. Then for email, I'm going to put the focus node and put email focus node as well. And also do the same thing for, did I validate for phone number? No, I think I did it for password, focus node. Then we have our password focus. Okay, so now I'm going to go back and click on next. If I'm done with the full name and I click on next, it's going to automatically get the email is going to be focused. It's going to move focus to the next available focus or input field, right? And once I'm done, it's going to nest it to the password. You can see how it skipped the phone number, right? So when you use focus node, it overrides this test input action.next, right? And then moves it to the next input field that we requested focus node on, all right? So that's just how it works. All right, so moving on, for the next mistake developers make is not limiting input length, which is like the max length. Users can enter excessively long tests, and that might affect UI layout. And there are some AI tools now you see online. If you want to impute characters that are more than 1,000, let's say you're a free user and you want to impute characters that are more than 1,000, they will show you an error, right? There will be a restriction, okay, in that input field. It's only pro users that can impute many characters, okay? So for you to apply something like that in your application, you will need to use the max length. So let's do that for full name. Let's just say we don't want our full name to exceed 10 characters. I'm going to use max length, okay? And in this max length, I'm going to specify 10 to it, all right? So now you can see this test now is showing here 5/10 because it's going to count the number of characters that we have inside. So if I clear this out, you will notice that it's going to show 0/10. If I try to type characters that exceeds 10, it's going to show us, like, it's not going to impute it, it's not going to show us any value to impute and all that, okay? So that's one thing you need to pay attention with, and don't make this mistake in your next Flutter application, all right? So another thing we are going to talk about is allowing unwanted characters, okay? Allowing letters in a number-only field is not good, right? See, for instance, we have this our phone number, right? I think we have already added it. We change, let me go back to where we have the phone number. You will see that I already added the text input type. I set the keyboard type to be number, right? But right now, normally you just maybe immediately you added this text input, this keyboard type, you just assume that the phone number is not going to accept any string. You are done with it, right? But just imagine users copying a string to clipboard and then going to your app to paste that. And you can see automatically your text input field accepted a string when it's not supposed to. And when you now start validation, now you start seeing errors, and most times you will not even know where the error is coming from. So to fix that, we need to use input formatters, right? So since we only want our phone number to accept only numbers, I'm going to use input formatter here. You can use the input formatter to do so many things, right? So here I'm going to say filtering. We're going to use filtering text input formatter, right? Dot digits only, right? I'm going to save that. Let me go back now and come back to the screen again. We're still going to maintain the keyboard type, but let's say I copy this string again and try to paste it here. It's not going to accept it, right? It's not going to accept it. But if I paste it in another text input field, it's going to accept it. But right in this number, it's not going to accept it because we have set the digits only. So we can experiment with allow input formatter to allow some few things. You can set your own pattern and all that, okay? So it's something you can work with. So just try as much as possible to avoid this mistake. Cross-check your text form field very well to be sure that all these mistakes, you did not make them, right? Try to avoid all these mistakes in your next project. So another thing I want to talk about is not setting text input action for better navigation. We have already talked about that, right? I talked about it when I was talking about validation. So moving focus from next screen. So you can also, so I'll just skip that one. I'm not really going to talk anything about it. Then another mistake developers make is not providing a clear button for UX. Okay. So let's say you're working on a, most times I know emails, phone numbers don't really need those clear buttons. But there are some cases where you're working with, what's it called? So you're working with stuff like search bar, search feed, right? Well, after users have typed, let's say I made mistake, I typed a lot of things and I've made mistakes. Instead of me clearing them one after the other, there should be a button somewhere to just clear those stuff. So what we can do is to add, no, this is not really something you really need that much, but it's still something you should consider most times, depending on the kind of input feed that you're creating. So here you just have to call full name controller.test. So you can see I just created a surface icons.clear and all that. So once I type so many strings, I can just click on clear to remove the string instead of allowing users to clear them one after the other, right? This is very much important when you're working in search feeds, right? Where you want users to search about something, right? It's very important. And the next thing I want to talk about is, let me remove this surface icon. So, all right. Another thing I want to talk about is allowing users to edit read-only feeds. Imagine building an app and you don't want users to edit email address, but maybe let's say the API is already validating email change, but in your app, you're not handling that. In your app, normally as a Flutter developer, you should be able to handle some basic stuffs in your app before pushing them to API, right? So to do that, we need to set the value, which is read only, to false, right? By default is false. We need to set read only to true. So when we save this now, if I come back here, you can see if I click on this string, if I click on this input field, nothing is happening. It's not bringing up any keyboard for us. But if I click on this one, it's bringing up keyboard. So that's what input read only does. It makes it read only, just as the name sounds, right? Read only. Okay. And also another thing you also need to take note of and avoid in your next project is not disabling autocorrect for certain fields. Fields like email, full name, uh, passwords, right? By default, you should set autocorrect to false because autocorrect is true by default, okay? But for fields like that, email, password, full name, username, you need to set autocorrect to false. Reason is because you don't want, most users might just, they might not see that autocorrect change, right? Maybe their name is Destiny, for instance, but maybe the normal word is supposed to miss an E from Destiny, okay? So autocorrect now, we're now going to correct that stuff to Destiny for them. And maybe they did not really pay attention, they did not like go through what they have imputed before, and they were not sending the wrong details. So for sensitive fields like that, try to remove autocorrect, disable it. But for stuff like about me, description, and all that, you can leave it as it is. You can enable it, all right? But this is something you should also take note of in your next flow project. So another thing again is ignoring focus management is very important. So let me remove this autofocus here. So if you come here now, you can see this focus management is here. Most times when you come to phone number, how do you intend to clear? Imagine this is the only widget that you have. No, we can use text input action dot with phone numbers or text input type dot with phone numbers. That's another window. But let's just say something like this now. How do you intend to clear the keyboard, right? Users cannot tap anywhere to clear it except they go to another field, right? So in order for us to get that out of the way, we are going to use FocusScope to unfocus all the input fields and the password. So how I normally do this is, let's say this is our form, right? You can just maybe your gesture detector, for instance, since is the main guy, we can wrap this with gesture detector, and inside here we can just call FocusScope, right? Dot of context dot on focus. So what this does, it hides the keyboard for us. So let me go back now and come back here. I click on this form. If I click anywhere around this widget, all right, so this isn't working. So let me move it down a little. Let me see, swap with child. Let me see if it works here. So right here, I'm going to click, right? You can see how if I click around some areas, it's actually closes the keyboard, right? You can also do it in case where you click on a button, right, to close the keyboard as well, right? That's the purpose of FocusScope. It removes focus from all the input feeds and hides the keyboard for us, okay? So that's something you should do. And the next thing we are going to talk about is not setting autofocus for first feed. Notice this, when I come to this screen, the keyboard doesn't pop up. Most times you want to set focus to this initial test input feed so that the keyboard will pop up. So what we can do in this case is to set autofocus for the test input feeds in this column to be true. So if I go back now and click here, you can see automatically the focus now is on this test feed. The reason why the keyboard is not showing it because we already used read only. So I'm going to remove that read only, go back and click. You can see automatically it gives it that focus that it deserves. Okay, so users will know that, okay, I need to put in my full name before moving on with other ones. So the next mistake that developers make is not customizing error styling and also cursor. So in this case, if we click next, submit, you can see that this error test is showing red. Maybe in your own case, you don't want it to show red, right? You want it to show a different color. What we can do here is to say error style, use a test style. You have color, and you can just set the color to, let's say, blue, for instance. All right, what happened there? I think that should be colors.blue, all right? You can see now the color has changed to blue and also the label to change to blue, right? So that is one thing you also need to pay attention to. There are a lot of things, if you go to input decoration, there's a lot of things that you can change, right? So there's a lot of things that you can modify. So play around with these properties. You're going to learn a lot about TextFormField. There's a lot you can do with TextFormField. And there's a lot of mistake that you're currently doing that if you look into TextFormField properly, you're going to see your mistakes and avoid them in your next project, okay? Then another one I want to talk about is improving on your cursor. Currently, this cursor is showing blue, right? So what I can do here is, I think they have cursor color. I can't really, okay, I think it's somewhere around here. We have cursor color, right? Let's say I want the cursor color to be green. So I'm going to save that. Let me go back and come back to this TextFormField. You can see now the cursor color is showing green for all the feeds. Okay, not really all the feeds because I did not implement it on all the feeds. So let me do it here. So you can change the cursor color as you want. Let's go back. And here we have our full name, cursor color green, 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 right? So you can play around with the cursor colors and play around with a lot of things with TextFormField. These are mistakes that you need to avoid. Then another mistake again that I see a lot of developers making is ignoring text capitalization for names. Notice when I come to this full name and I type my name, you can see that it's all in lowercase, but normally names are supposed to be capitalized, right? So for us to get something like that, what we are going to do now is to work with a property called text capitalization, right? We have our text capitalization dot characters, sentences, words, and but we're working with words for this example. Then you can go and look at characters, sentences, and others, okay, to improve on your next project. So now if I go back, notice the difference. All the characters are all in uppercase, right? So if I click my name, it now reduced to lowercase. So this way, once I type, you can see that the name now is now capitalized. So this is one amazing thing that you need to implement in your project, and try to avoid it also in your next project. All right. So quickly, let's move on to the final mistake a lot of people do is they don't target screen readers. They don't make their app to be accessibility worthy, right? To be able to work better with screen readers. Because a lot of old people and disabled people, they make use of screen readers in some apps, right? So in your own case, you need to work with that. And in order for us to do that, we need a widget called Semantics. Semantics is an important widget that a lot of people don't really know about that much, especially beginners coming into Flutter, right? It helps you to add better accessibility feature in your app. And if it's all these read aloud apps, right, they'll be able to read out your widgets, your buttons out based on the semantic widget that you added. So without that semantic, it will be difficult for screen readers and for the blind people using screen readers and read aloud app to be able to make use of your app. So what we can do in our test form field, we're going to wrap the widget with semantics. So in that semantics, we can now add a label and we can say enter your name. So adding this text like this, right, it makes it possible for screen reader to read out this text field to users. Whenever they tap on it, it's going to read it out, enter your name, right? Then we can also do it to other fields as well. In this case, we have our semantics here. So here now we can now say something like email or enter your email address. Okay, we can also do it for others. So I'll just quickly go through all of them. Right, you can also do it for your buttons as well. So this is just like a bonus tip for you guys. So you can do it for buttons, and you can say label submit form. Yeah, so this is just how you work with semantics, and all these are when you avoid these mistakes, it will like improve your app's performance, your usability, and maintainability as well. So that's it. That's 15 plus. I think 20. I said a lot more than 15. So these are like 15 plus mistakes developers make when using TextFormField in Flutter. And I also told you guys how to fix them. So if you learned something new, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more Flutter tutorials. So comment below if you have any question or suggestion for future videos. All right. So happy coding, guys.